When most people talk about self-improvement, they immediately turn to motivation. They wait for the right song, the right mood, or the right burst of energy before taking action. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Motivation is fickle, unreliable, and fleeting. It comes when it wants to, and it leaves when you need it most. If you build your life on motivation, you build on sand, because the moment life gets hard, when your body aches, when the alarm clock feels unbearable, when setbacks crush your spirit, motivation will not come to rescue you. And that is where discipline enters. Discipline is the refusal to wait for a feeling before you act. It is the decision to move even when your heart whispers excuses. It is the moment when the body says no, and the mind commands lies. Think about it. Every great achievement in history was born not out of bursts of inspiration, but out of repeated, deliberate discipline. The artist who paints masterpieces doesn't always wake up inspired. The athlete who dominates the world stage does not always feel like training. The philosopher, the scientist, the leader, none of them had the luxury of waiting until they felt ready. They acted, and by acting, they built momentum. That is the psychological secret most people miss. Discipline does not follow motivation. Motivation follows discipline. You begin and the energy comes later. If you've ever sat at a desk staring at a blank page, you know the struggle. You don't feel like writing. Your mind tells you to postpone, but the moment you put down a single sentence, something shifts. The mind begins to engage. The energy rises. This is the law of action. Motion creates emotion. But without discipline, you never reach that moment. You stay stuck in the endless cycle of waiting for motivation that may never arrive. Philosophically, this speaks to a deeper reality about human life. To live only by how you feel is to be a slave to your emotions. To live by discipline is to become master of your destiny. Feelings are temporary, discipline is permanent. Motivation is a spark, discipline is the fire that keeps burning long after the spark fades. One is shallow, the other is foundational. And the question each of us must ask is, do I want to be carried by moods, or do I want to live by principles? When you understand this distinction, you stop treating discipline as a punishment. You see it instead as freedom. Because when you no longer depend on the fragile energy of motivation, you are free to act regardless of how you feel. You reclaim control over yourself. That is why the first step in forcing yourself to have discipline is to stop waiting for motivation altogether. The truth is simple. Motivation may start the journey, but only discipline finishes it. And until you accept that, you will forever remain a prisoner to your moods instead of a commander of your actions. Life at its core is a negotiation with sacrifice. Every choice we make is an exchange. Something is given up so something else can be gained. And this is where discipline reveals its true meaning. Because discipline is not about punishment, it is about choosing your sacrifices wisely. The undisciplined person thinks they are escaping sacrifice, but in reality, they are only delaying it. They refuse the pain of discipline today, only to inherit the far greater pain of regret tomorrow. Consider the student who avoids the discomfort of study. In the moment, it feels easier to scroll, to wander, to push aside the book. They avoid a few hours of effort. But what they inherit is years of limited opportunities, doors that never open, and a gnawing awareness of what could have been. Or think of the person who refuses to discipline their health. They indulge in ease, avoiding the momentary discomfort of training, of eating responsibly, of restraint. But time collects the debt. It comes back as weakness, illness, and a life cut short. One way or another, life demands its payment. The only question is whether you pay it with discipline now or regret later. This truth echoes through every domain of human existence. Philosophically, it reminds us of an ancient principle that suffering is not avoidable but exchangeable. You can suffer the weight of effort, or you can suffer the heaviness of despair. You can endure the sting of pushing your limits, or you can endure the dull, endless ache of wasted potential. There is no path without pain, but there is a path where pain becomes meaningful, and that path is discipline. The disciplined individual understands this trade. They do not ask, how can I avoid pain? Instead, they ask, which pain is worth enduring? That single question transforms the way you live. Because suddenly, a 5 a.m. alarm, a long night of work, a grueling hour in the gym, none of it feels like torture. It feels like investment. The discomfort becomes purposeful. Every sacrifice today carries with it the promise of tomorrow's freedom. And here lies the paradox most people miss. Discipline is often framed as restriction, as though it steals pleasure. In reality, it is indulgence without discipline that robs life of joy. The one who avoids sacrifice now becomes chained to consequences later. But the one who embraces discipline now becomes free, free to live with strength, with clarity, with pride in themselves. Freedom and fulfillment do not come from avoiding pain, they come from choosing the right pain. So, when you stand at the crossroads of effort and ease, remember this simple truth: the pain of discipline is temporary, but the pain of regret is eternal. One burns for a moment, the other scars for a lifetime. Choose the burn. One of the greatest battles in life is not against the world outside of us, but against the voice within us. That voice is cunning, persuasive, and endlessly creative in finding excuses. It whispers, "You've worked hard enough today, you deserve a break." It says, "Tomorrow is a better day to start." It convinces you that delaying your effort is harmless, that comfort is more important than commitment, and yet if you look closely, you'll see that the difference between those who rise and those who remain stuck is this: the successful have trained their minds to obey, while the unsuccessful continue to negotiate. The undisciplined mind is like a lawyer for weakness. It will argue your case with brilliance. It will tell you that you don't have enough energy, that you'll perform better later, that circumstances aren't ideal. But the disciplined mind does not negotiate, it commands. It understands that if you allow excuses to sit at the table, they will dominate the conversation. Every time you hesitate, every time you engage in mental bargaining, you give power to weakness and strip power from your will. Think about a soldier on the battlefield. There is no time to negotiate with fear. The command is given and it must be executed. That is discipline. It does not mean you are fearless. It means you have built a system where action overrides hesitation. And in daily life, the battlefield looks different, but the principle is the same. The alarm rings at dawn, and the undisciplined mind debates whether to rise. The disciplined mind gets up. The project feels overwhelming, and the undisciplined mind argues for delay. The disciplined mind begins anyway. Each moment is a test of authority. Does your mind serve your higher purpose, or does it serve your comfort? Psychologically, this is about building patterns of obedience. Every time you give in to excuses, you reinforce weakness. But every time you act without negotiation, you strengthen the neural pathways of discipline. Over time, action becomes automatic. The effort to push through resistance becomes lighter, not because the task is easier, but because the mind has been trained to execute rather than debate. Philosophically, this is about sovereignty. A person who cannot command themselves is not free, they are enslaved to impulse. To live in discipline is to reclaim authority over the most fundamental territory you will ever govern, your own mind. And when you train your mind to obey, you open the door to mastery in every other part of life. So when that inner voice begins its endless debate, silence it with action. Refuse to give it power through negotiation, because the moment you stop bargaining with weakness, you start living with strength. And remember this: excuses may sound reasonable, but they are still lies. Discipline is the truth that sets you free. We often imagine discipline as something that requires dramatic gestures, a life-changing transformation overnight, a complete restructuring of habits in one sweeping decision. But the truth is far less glamorous and far more profound. Discipline is not forged in extraordinary moments. It is shaped in the small, ordinary routines that seem almost insignificant in the moment. The way you wake up, the way you begin your day, the choices you make when no one is watching, these are the bricks from which the cathedral of your character is built. Psychologists call this the principle of compounding. Just as money, when invested wisely, multiplies over time, so do your daily actions. A small disciplined act, repeated consistently, creates momentum. At first, the change is invisible, even frustrating. You may wake up early for a week and see no difference. You may write a page a day and feel it amounts to nothing. You may go to the gym and feel your body is the same. But discipline is patient. It works silently below the surface until one day the accumulation breaks through in undeniable form. What once felt impossible now becomes your normal. The danger is that most people underestimate both the power of small actions and the cost of neglecting them. Skipping a workout once feels harmless. Sleeping in one morning feels justified. Breaking a promise to yourself feels trivial. But each small surrender compounds just as powerfully as each small act of discipline. And soon, a life is shaped not by dramatic failure, but by thousands of tiny concessions that hollow out potential. Think about the person who decides to read for 10 minutes a day. At first, 10 minutes seems meaningless. But 10 minutes a day for a year is more than 60 hours of learning, an entire university course quietly completed in the margins of daily life. Or the person who commits to saving a small amount each week. The growth is slow, almost invisible, until one day they wake to discover financial freedom built on habits so small they were almost forgettable. That is the paradox. The ordinary, when repeated with discipline, becomes extraordinary. Philosophically, this challenges our obsession with the dramatic. We crave the breakthrough moment, the instant success, the transformation that happens in a flash. But life is not built in flashes, it is built in repetitions. True power lies not in rare bursts of intensity, but in steady consistency. To master discipline is to embrace the humility of doing the small things every single day, trusting that over time, the accumulation will transform you into someone unrecognizable compared to who you were. So never underestimate the power of a routine. Greatness is not a product of one grand act, but of countless small acts done with intention. Remember this, your future self is being built right now, not in the extraordinary moments, but in the ordinary choices you repeat daily. And if you choose discipline in the small things, the big things will take care of themselves. Discipline is often described as something you do, a set of actions repeated until they become habits. But at a deeper level, discipline is not only about behavior, it is about identity. Every disciplined act is a declaration of who you are becoming. Each time you force yourself to do what is difficult, you are not just completing a task, you are shaping the image you hold of yourself. And that image, that identity, is the foundation upon which all lasting transformation rests. Think of it this way. If you see yourself as someone who struggles, someone who always falls short, then every disciplined act will feel like a contradiction to your identity. You will fight against yourself. But if you begin to view yourself as someone who follows through, someone who does the hard things others avoid, then every disciplined act reinforces that identity. The mind seeks alignment between belief and behavior. So if you shift your self-concept, discipline stops feeling like a foreign struggle and starts feeling like an expression of who you are. This is why forcing yourself to keep promises to yourself, even in small ways, is so important. Each victory, no matter how minor, is proof to your subconscious that you are no longer the same. You are no longer the one who postpones, who quits, who negotiates with weakness. You are becoming the one who endures, who commands, who rises. And the more evidence you accumulate, the stronger this identity becomes. Eventually, the question shifts from, how do I push myself to be disciplined, to, what would someone like me do? And the answer is obvious. Someone like you shows up, no matter how difficult it is. Philosophically, this touches on the essence of becoming. Human beings are not static creatures. We are constantly in the process of creating ourselves. Every decision we make is not just about the present moment, but about the person we are sculpting for the future. Discipline, then, is the chisel with which you carve your character. It is the deliberate act of transforming potential into embodiment. When you choose the hard path, you are not just proving discipline, you are embodying strength, resilience, and mastery. And this is why discipline feels so powerful when practiced consistently. It doesn't just change what you do, it changes who you are. Over time, you begin to see yourself differently. You carry yourself differently. You believe in yourself differently. And that belief radiates outward, shaping how others see you as well. People respect the one who has command over themselves because it is rare. And in a world where most surrender to comfort, the disciplined individual stands apart. So the question you must ask yourself is not simply, what should I do today? But rather, who am I becoming by what I do today? Because every action either strengthens the identity of weakness or the identity of power. Choose discipline, and you choose to become the person capable of everything you once thought impossible. When most people hear the word discipline, they think of rules, restrictions, and limitations. They see it as a cage that robs them of freedom. But the paradox is this discipline is not a prison, it is the very key that unlocks freedom. Because without discipline, your life is dictated by impulse, by laziness, by temptation, by the immediate pull of comfort. You may feel free in the moment when you indulge those impulses, but over time you become enslaved by them. The person who cannot control their appetite becomes a prisoner to their body. The one who cannot control their spending becomes shackled by debt. The one who cannot control their focus becomes enslaved by distraction. Lack of discipline does not lead to freedom, it leads to bondage. Now consider the opposite. The individual who trains themselves to wake early, to follow through, to resist temptation, to govern their impulses, that person begins to live with a kind of freedom that others cannot imagine. They have the freedom of health, the freedom of strength, the freedom of financial stability, the freedom of clarity, the freedom of self-respect. Discipline, in truth, is the only path to freedom because it frees you from being controlled by the lower parts of yourself. Psychologically, this is the shift from short-term pleasure to long-term fulfillment. A life of undisciplined indulgence offers temporary release but permanent consequence. A life of discipline offers temporary resistance but permanent reward. The disciplined person understands this trade and embraces it willingly because they know what lies on the other side of restraint is a life of genuine freedom. Freedom to choose, freedom to act, freedom to live without the chains of regret. Philosophically, this reflects one of the oldest truths about the human condition. He who cannot master himself will be mastered by something else. To live without discipline is to surrender sovereignty over your own life. But to live with discipline is to reclaim it. True freedom is not doing whatever you feel like doing in the moment. True freedom is having the power to do what you know must be done, regardless of how you feel. That kind of freedom can only be built through discipline. So when you force yourself to be disciplined, you are not restricting your life, you are reclaiming it. You are choosing to live by design rather than by default, by purpose rather than by impulse. And in that choice, you discover that discipline is not a punishment, it is a liberation. Remember, this indulgence may promise freedom, but it only delivers chains. Discipline may feel like chains at first, but it is the only force that breaks them. Choose discipline, and you will know what it truly means to live free.